Now my highlight, and welcome everybody for coming along tonight. It is our great pleasure to have Christine Barbour, who's convener of Hamilton Branch, amongst other things, and has also been part of this Le Quesnoy Surviving Soldiers project. So tonight she's going to be telling us all about both the project and the New Zealand Liberation Museum and a bit about Le Quesnoy. And I'm not going to say too much more because Christine covers off quite a lot in her presentation, but like her, I have a grandfather who I believe was at Le Quesnoy, and so I am very fascinated by it all. So I'm going to ask the last two people to turn their cameras off and let Christine get started.
Right. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for the invite to talk. I'm now ex-convener of the Hamilton branch, but have been the convener for many, many years. But by trade, I'm a registered nurse and midwife. So it's a bit strange how things happen, isn't it? That we change direction at certain times of life. Anyway, I'll just open my, open my screen. Can you see my screen there? Cool.
Yep, we're good. And the great thing about recording it is I can edit out any faffing around we don't want to see later.
Just so wonderful. Super. Anyway,
right, off you go.
Off I go. So it's pretty obvious. It's the Le Quesnoy Surviving Soldiers project, and a little bit about the museum as mentioned. So I've been doing this along with my first cousin, who's Sylvester there that you can see, Herb Farrant, and Carol Devereaux assisted us at the beginning of our project. So this is just a little display that we had at our local branch meeting last Anzac Day. And, you know, this is what we do. We remember them. And I just kept thinking, we do remember them, but often it's the ones who died that we're remembering. So I want to focus on a different group that we need to remember. Just take a look at that soldier in the middle with his uniform on. That is my grandfather in his Scottish regalia. I think that's for the local pipe band somewhere down south. So we'll just go to the next slide. So you've probably all heard of Le Quesnoy, a very special place. And as you all know, since 1918, we've finished World War I, and in New Zealand we've had a special relationship with Le Quesnoy, especially Cambridge in New Zealand, which I live close to. Why Cambridge? Because the Reverend at the time at the St Andrew's Church, he was the chaplain for the NZEF. And Wally Averill, brother of the chap at the top of the ladder in the photo, brother of Lieutenant Averill, he was later the curate at the same church. Also at the church, there are 3 stained glass windows with beautiful pictures of Le Quesnoy and our connection with Le Quesnoy. And also there is Butler's 1920 painting, which is this one, also in the church. So there is quite a connection, and we have a Cambridge Le Quesnoy Friendship Association, which is very strong, that keeps us going. So I'll just read this in case you can't see it for those of you who aren't familiar with the story of Le Quesnoy. In this battle on the 4th of November 1918, the New Zealand Rifle Brigade stormed the fortress of Le Quesnoy, which is in northern France. Despite appalling casualties caused by German machine gun fire, they located an unguarded sector and managed to break into the fortress and took over 2,000 prisoners. This important victory speeded the end of the war. So a little bit about Le Quesnoy. There have been battles through this village for many, many centuries. So this was the second Battle of Sambre, they call it, or we call it Battle of Le Quesnoy. And here's a diagram just showing the New Zealand forces, and their objective was to capture the village by the 4th of November. This was the most successful day ever in the New Zealand division in World War I, and it was the 3rd New Zealand Rifle Brigade who were involved in this, with the 1st and 3rd Battalions, as you can see, on the outskirts, and the 4th who scaled the wall. The 2nd came through the gate after Arawhata got up the wall and successfully entered into the town and opened the gate. So even though we hear a lot about, you know, the 4th who scaled the wall, of course, everybody worked as a team, and we mustn't forget all of those who supported them. So a little bit about the village. It was occupied by the Germans right throughout the war. And within the walls, as you can see, it's a fortified town by that wee diagram. There were 3,000 civilians working in, living inside there. And the New Zealanders took 2,500 German prisoners. So they were welcomed with open arms, as you can imagine, by the French. And the new museum that I'm going to talk about later is a site of a 12th century abbey, and they found evidence of graves, really old graves as well. So you can see the fortified town of Le Quesnoy. It's got moats and star-shaped ramparts, and the ramparts were between 6 and 9 meters high, and underneath there, the causeways and tunnels and moats, there's a great number of tunnels underneath that were used during the war. Now, on the right, the picture, Le Quesnoy, the story of the town New Zealanders saved, that was by Glenn Harper. That's a children's book, but it's absolutely wonderful for adults as well, because it gives us the basic story. So this is just a few photos of the beautiful surrounding area and the ramparts. So 1536 originally built because it was called the Spanish Netherlands were trying to attack the town, and it was captured by France in 1654. And the Sebastian Vauban, who's the famous military engineer, he reinforced the ramparts, adding forts on the corners to give them a bit more strength. So if you do know that you've got a soldier who was at Le Quesnoy, this is what I did. I got the wee book, ordered enough for every grandchild. I put a photo of my grandfather inside the front cover and a little ditty about him, just so that the story stays alive. So you may not know that you have a soldier in Le Quesnoy. I know Yvonne discovered she had her grandfather at Le Quesnoy after I gave one of my talks, and we found his name documented. So in their military file, in their personnel file, it often says, you know, out to the field, or out to B company or D company, which is not terribly helpful. So we often won't know unless you look in detail through their regimental histories. And of course, to do that, you've got to know which regiment they're in, and preferably which company. So it's very hard to actually nail down whether a soldier was there or not. So we'll work around how we can find these things out. So where is Le Quesnoy? it's up where my little heart is. So it's, you know, a couple of hours northeast of Paris, and right on the Belgian border, you know, 12 miles, I think, to the Belgian border. And if you're going to Le Quesnoy from London, London is sort of the top left out of the picture. You come across on the Eurostar, you come to Lille there at the top on the Eurostar, and then you change there just to a local train and then to Le Quesnoy. It's very easy to get there from Lille. So the project, where did the project start? And when it started? On Anzac Day 2022, so that's a year and a bit away. I was at Cambridge at the usual Anzac Day celebration. The Friendship Association chairman was not there on that day, so I got roped in with Heather Wellington there, and we laid the wreath for the association. And afterwards we had a few photos and a bit of a chinwag. And here on the right's myself, next to me is Herb Farrant. He's the founder of the New Zealand Memorial Museum Trust. So he founded that in 2011 and currently president of the New Zealand Military Historical Society. So why did I volunteer? Well, when you've got a connection, it makes such a difference, doesn't it? So this is my grandfather with his 3 stripes, which he didn't keep for very long because they may have left New Zealand as a sergeant, but as soon as you get to England and to the camps and onto the front, there's a lot more soldiers who have much more experience. So they often drop a rank, which he did after his feet hit the Western Front. So he was wounded at Le Quesnoy on the 4th of November 1918. So yeah, I have quite a strong connection. So 135 New Zealand soldiers died on the 4th of November during the battle, 340 wounded. And between the 1st and 7th of November, 196 had died, because of course you've got those wounded men and many of them die as well. So, you know, you might have a battle, but you've got to think of the numbers of the deaths as the ones who come sometimes weeks and sometimes months afterwards. So in Christopher Pugley's book, Le Quesnoy 1918, he restricted it to the 1st to the 7th of November. So in World War I, 18,000 New Zealanders died in the Western Front and 41,000 wounded. But what about the 80,000 who returned to New Zealand? Not quite themselves. You can see the chap in the photo with his 1,000-yard stare. It must have been just absolutely horrible. And they returned with wounds visible and invisible. And here's a quote that I got out of Christopher Pugsley's article in The Listener some time ago. And he was quoting one of the chaps he interviewed. I felt like a stranger at home, unconnected with New Zealand, and I'm sure a lot of them felt like that after their experiences. And as you know, many never talked about their experiences because they were so shocking. So just a little bit about the history of the museum. Herb Farrant and Major Greg Moyle, they've been planning somewhere in France to have a place for New Zealanders since 2000. So that's 23 years of planning, which is quite a long time. So a year before the 100th anniversary in 2018, they had managed to negotiate with the French government. It's unusual for anybody from any other countries to buy property in France, especially government property. So we were very fortunate that Greg and Herb managed to organise this. So this is Carlier's home. He built this in the 1800s, late 1800s. He is one of the mayors of Le Quesnoy, and his son was also a mayor of Le Quesnoy as well. And his son was there during World War I when the town was occupied, and he hid soldiers in his basement in his home, and he was caught by the Germans and he was sent to Germany into one of the camps, and I believe he survived. So the museum is now called Arawhata, and the purpose of the museum is to honour New Zealand's World War I contribution and to create a Kiwi place for us, and to provide a facility rather than celebrating war. It honours freedom and celebrates friendship and inspires the future. And when we visited, oh no, this is in 2018 when they took it over, this is what the museum looked like. It looks not too bad in the photos, but I believe it was a pretty poor state. So that was 2018, which was when the 100th was on, and many of you probably went over for that. I went over last year for the Liberation Day celebrations on the 4th of November, and I was hosted by Rosaria Campbell, who was the then manager of the trust. She got caught in France with COVID, so she was there for some time, but she beavered on and did a lot of work for the opening and the refurbishment of the museum. So that's Rosaria there on the right, and myself on a very cold day. So she kindly took me through the museum and the state it was. So here we are at the French Memorial on the left. Everybody marches through the town on these evenings. We have the band in the front and we walk through to the New Zealand Memorial, lay wreaths, and then we go through the sluice gate, which is where they went through, up the ladder to the town when they freed it, all the way back to the centre of town by the town hall to this memorial where we lay more wreaths. And when Rosaria took me in, this is what it looked like. Probably worse than it did in 2018 because they'd torn bits and pieces apart, and they'd put a few new ceilings in and a lot of insulation. And you can see that the electrician was busy with lots of power cords hanging down. So it was a bit of a state, but you could see progress was being made. And by April 2023 this year, it was really looking great. And the room on the bottom right is the room where you'll see shortly where the large soldier is represented. So the renovation was completed by May and the opening was for October 2023. So between May and October, Weta Workshop had to get in and make it into a museum. So this is their concept photos of what the museum was going to look like. And the bottom left, you can see those screens. That's where the online cenotaph is available. And that's where people do research and scroll through to find these soldiers. So that's the concept. So now they need your help. There you go. They're nearly at $15 million, all by private sponsor with no government funding. So they've done very, very well. New Zealanders are being most generous. So down to the project. This is the bit genealogists will be interested in. So we did this project for the Weta visitor experience. We wanted to make sure there were names, as many as we could get, on on the cenotaph, which we didn't know it was going to go on the cenotaph at that stage. So that when visitors went there and they thought, wow, I wonder if my granddad or my dad or my great-granddad was here, and they could log in and put their name in and see if he was there. So the dates that the project covered were between 23rd of October and 7th of November, and only the soldiers who fought and survived. Any of them who had died were not included in this because they're already well documented in various places. So we were looking for about 14,400 men. So this was a joint venture between NZSG. It was our contribution to the project in France. And yeah, so it was the Memorial Trust, NZSG, and the Military Historical Society. So the three of us were quite involved for a while. So first thing we needed was volunteers. So after the Anzac Day meeting, when I opened my mouth and talked to Herb and said, what about these poor soldiers who came home and, you know, they're not really documented anywhere. What about them? So, you know, a month later, he sent me a lovely email, given your willingness to participate. This is Herb's style. He's very good. He's very encouraging to people. So I took the bait and off we went. So that took a year of a lot of work. We're still working on it in a small way to refine it, which is fine. So we had a meeting in May at Panmure between all parties, and eventually we've got a spreadsheet designed between what the Memorial Trust wanted, between what the Military Trust wanted, and Carol, who was the project's manager at NZSG, was most helpful at that stage. We advertised for volunteers using the NZSG links, and we got 20 volunteers from all parts of New Zealand. And Barry Sylvester, he was in Auckland. He'd just finished writing a book and was perfectly placed to help us. He didn't have any connections to Le Quesnoy that he knew of, but remind me later and I'll tell you that story. So our sources. First sources we went to were books. We looked through 40 books. We went through all the pages that were known to have information about Le Quesnoy. The good thing is Le Quesnoy was at the end of World War I, so there was usually a chapter at the end of most books on that, unless it was a book solely on Le Quesnoy, which there are quite a few. So just books off any shelves, anything we could find on World War I, we looked at. And this was one woman who had library experience, and she was just excellent. She was keen to use the computer for doing data entry, so this was just wonderful to have her do this. Then we looked at official regimental histories of the NZEF. These books are all online by NZETC. You might know about that site from Victoria University. Then we looked at the nominal roles. So these are the soldiers who embarked on the ships for the Western Front, and they are also on Ancestry. Often we don't know they're in there unless you go in the back door to Ancestry and go through your sources. If you just search for a person's name, you often don't find these. So that's the link there, which works really well. So we were looking at between the 30th and the 38th reinforcements that were sent over between June and October, because by then, if they got on the boat in June, they would have had time, and like the October ones as well, to have gone to sling camp and have their training, etc., and get across to France. My grandfather was in the 36th, and he basically went to England, went to camp, and then straight out to Le Quesnoy area. So yeah, the 36 were pretty straight through. So we did data entry for 14 ships. As you can see, the print is very small, and some of the data entry people did sometimes 1,000 of these at a time. They did fabulous work. So quite a few men in the ships and about 17,000 men on that. Then I was at Panmure, just looking through the shelves. I said to one of the librarians, "Where do you hold your World War I books?" And snuck between two big normal books was this little, like a pamphlet, and it was a nominal roll for the contingent to Anzac Day in Sydney, 20 years after, yes, that's right, my maths is correct, 20 years after the freeing of Le Quesnoy. So all of these chaps, returned servicemen, going over to Sydney to celebrate Anzac Day. So that was a really good list. And they all had their street addresses as well, which we didn't enter. We entered their number there on the left and their name, but not their address. But that is available at Panmure Library. We looked at museum sources. Heather Wellington looked at the Cambridge Museum to find any reference she could to Le Quesnoy, and also the yearbook. The New Zealand yearbooks have a list of all the honours and awards. This is just an example of what you can get for your battalion. I was down at National Archives many years ago. So that's the war diary of the 3rd Battalion of the new NZEF. So, you know, it's fairly detailed. Not too many names in it, but you never know your luck. This is one of the great finds. I didn't know these existed. And Chronicles of the NZEF wouldn't make any sense to me, but in the last few pages in the back, there's these hospital reports. And when this little magazine was produced, it was produced in London. It was sent out twice a month to all the troops in the Western Front during World War I. So we looked at these magazines between October and December 1918, because those are the times we were looking at. So there were about 700 names in each issue, with their service number and the name of the hospital they were in, the date they came into the hospital, the reason they were there, like GSW, gunshot wound, and their status, whether they were progressing or not. So this was all compiled by these visitors. And you can see this one, the visitor was Miss J.P. Dryden, and look at all the men she visited. Nearly 2.5 columns there. And that was at Brockenhurst General Hospital, where a lot of our soldiers went to over near Southampton. So this is the Chronicles of the NZEF, which are, as you can see, on Ancestry. So there's a closer photo. Yvonne will recognise this name. We found her chap there, and you can see how useful it can be. If you thought they got wounded, you could actually find them. And there was so many hospitals in Britain, so many of them. So these weren't indexed, but we have added these chaps into our data, and we did it in a separate database, knowing that this was something that the New Zealand Military Association wanted to eventually index. So we put it in a separate database so it could be continued on at some other time. And since then, the Auckland Museum has taken up the job of indexing these, so that will be absolutely marvellous. So this is the other kind of thing that's in the magazine, not just sort of promotions and etc., but a few little bits of light relief for the chaps. So this one's titled Anxiety, and so there's two soldiers in the trench under heavy shell fire, and they watch with alarm the fate of the D Company rum jar. So you can see that the rum jar was fairly important to them. So another list we found was the New Zealand World War I Army casualty lists, and they cover right through the war and after. Again, this is on Ancestry and it's indexed. So there's my grandfather, second up from the bottom, Matheson RD, date reported 28th. Remember, he was wounded on the 4th. So, you know, it takes 2 weeks for the news to get through. And casualty list number is not much use to me, but at least we know that he was wounded and it was written down. I also found him at Brockenhurst Hospital. So this is probably the first place to go to because it's searchable by name. And if he was wounded, then I would go to the Chronicles. More sources. Direct descendants. After we put the news out that I was doing this project, I got a lot of emails, and direct descendants sent me a lot of information. I passed this on to the museum trust in case they wanted to use it in the museum. And then when my mum shifted into a rest home, and as you do, you clear the house, and she was great at keeping most things. I found not this photo, but the private correspondence for this tour, because my grandfather was going back to Le Quesnoy in 1968 for the 50th. So it was wonderful to see all of the letters between the travel agent and the participants. So that was really a bonus. And then somebody popped up with this photo of them leaving the airport. So this is them about to get on the plane at Auckland Airport. But I can only identify 4 people. So unfortunately, Lieutenant Avril, that's his wife on the bottom right, and he is on the far, just beyond her on the right, out of the picture. For some reason, and I don't know why, he got cut out because of the size of the picture, and a few people to the left as well, but I have got the original. So if you do know anybody in here, please, I'd love to hear from you. So these are our statistics. Our main database, which is the books and the embarkation rolls and all of those other things I've mentioned, we put in about 19,000 entries. And remember, some didn't have service numbers. The awards and that don't have service numbers, so that brought it down to about 15,000 because we really do need a double ID for them. So 4,000 odd entries with the source where the source data did not include the service numbers there. So in the hospital reports database, they entered 4,889 entries. And remember, because they were probably visited multiple times, their name appeared quite a few times. So we ended up with about 3,800 soldiers. So add those together and we ended up with 18,800 individual men. So that's quite a few men. that we thought were at Le Quesnoy. It's around about the number that was estimated. So in May this year, we had a few discussions with Cenotaph. The Trust wasn't sure how our data was going to be presented, but they thought, and we thought as well, it's probably sensible just to have one place for soldiers' names in New Zealand. So the one place, hopefully in the future, will be the online Cenotaph, where it's free to view. Copies, of course, of the data have been sent to NZSG, and you can view it there, and it's going into the December Kiwi Collection in the free section, so everyone can see it. Copy to the Military Historical Society, and if you search on Cenotaph in New Zealand, you can go down to that popular searches, and one of those popular searches is Le Quesnoy. Previously, it only had the chaps who died at Le Quesnoy, so 100 odd, and now we're up to about 1,500, because we're just having to sift through them very, very carefully, because the Cenotaph has certain parameters before they want anything put on there. So people search on the Cenotaph at the Liberation Museum in France, and they were able to do that from October. So after our visit last year, just a little aside, we went to Southampton and followed the route that these wounded soldiers would have done. So it was a dark night, and we had relations in the car, and it wasn't a dark night, it was a typical November British day when it was starting to get dark, about 3 o'clock or 3:30 in the afternoon. And I thought, I've always wanted to go to Brockenhurst, and we just had a day in Beaulieu looking at the cars. And so my cousin was in the back, and she was Googling while my husband was driving, and we eventually found Brockenhurst Hospital, which is just up the road from Beaulieu. There was a big gate, and there was no indication of that it was the hospital. So we knew we were in the right place, though, and in the gate there was a little door. So I opened the door and I climbed in through the door, and inside the property there was a notice to say this was Brockenhurst, previously Brockenhurst Hospital, and they called it Tin Town because it was made of corrugated iron. So as I was standing there reading this notice, this chap came running down this about 100-metre long drive and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm from New Zealand. I think my grandfather was here when he was wounded." "Oh yes," he said, "you're in the right place. Come along, come along." So he opened up the big gates. We drive down the long driveway, and he took us for a tour. So it's now an outdoor centre for young people, and at where they do the washing up, where they do activities, the signs everywhere, and they're large signs, like full size, with details about what it used to be. You can see this one here. It's got pictures of the buildings that were, pictures inside the ward. So it was fascinating to see. None of them remain, but what they did is built these wonderful little pods, and each pod is the name of one of the battles that the New Zealanders were involved with. So every battle has a pod which has a notice. So you can see their little notices on the right there. So you can see how cold it was. This is me outside the Le Quesnoy pod where the young people would sleep, and the only reason we were allowed in is because nobody was there at the time. And as you can see, it was opened by the now Queen in 2016, and they call it Poppy Pod Village. So after that we thought, we've got to go and see the other hospitals as well, because there were 3 hospitals in the era area. There's Barbour Lawn, which is the top one, and over to the right, the one that the officers were treated in. That was just a lovely, lovely hospital that it was, now a hotel. And then it was getting exceptionally dark, and we had to find the wee church where our New Zealanders were buried. Like, you know, many of them didn't come out of Brockenhurst, so the Commonwealth War Graves Commission at the back of this wee church has quite a large graveyard, so it's quite a pretty little spot. But we scrambled around the church, went down the path, down the back, and in the background you can see the graves which we walked amongst, and then we found this one. So this was a local chap who was a snake catcher in the New Forest. So I thought this was fascinating, so I took a picture of that. I thought it was one of the most interesting gravestones I've ever seen. So here we go on to the museum opening. If you do want to keep in contact what's happening, that's the URL there to get their newsletter, which is really, really interesting. And that's some of the partners. Richard Izard, who was the founding partner, donated a lot of money. So this is how the system works, and all of these people who have donated, their names are in the museum on the wall forever. So we didn't have any direct government funding, but they did have people like the chap on the left bottom picture, Nigel Gattage. He was sent over, or should I say Sudan asked the Defence Force if they could have somebody on the ground there, and Nigel was there, and he gave a lot of very good practical advice when they were getting everything set up. So in this picture, along with Nigel, he's Major Nigel, and the next chap to the right, who is very tall, he's the Defence Attaché in Brussels, Colonel Ryan McKinstry. You'll see another photo of him soon, and I'm afraid I don't know the other two chaps. So this is the 10th of October, just this year. We've been back 6 weeks now. We started on the left with the Māori blessing, and that was quite warm, not too bad for 7 a.m. in the morning, but a lovely, lovely service. The party went through the museum and blessed each room, and we waited outside. And then after that, some of the people were able to go through and have a viewing at that stage. Then on the right, there was a champagne breakfast with the Mayor, Sophie, and you can see Sir Don McKinnon on the left, who's the chair of the trust. And then we went on a walking tour. By then it had warmed up a little bit, and so you can see the bottom right, that was the start of our tour. We had a local young man who took us around. He was really, really excellent. And above that is the avenue that you walk down to get to the memorial, which you can see me standing by on the bottom left, which is the New Zealand Memorial, which is around the corner from where the ladder went up. The top left, you can see the sluice gate and the wee tunnel. That is where they placed the ladder, and you can see Chris Pugsley there with his book open with the 1923 painting, and right above that book is the area where the ladder was placed. The only reason this little shelf was there is because somebody wanted a duck pond. So if that person hadn't created a duck pond, the New Zealanders wouldn't have been able to get in. So they put a little dam there that allowed the water to back up. And then here's the bottom. You can see our military attaché again, out of uniform, standing beside Chris Pugsley. You can see how tall he is. And above him, you can see Ru Aotearoa. As most of you know, all the streets, many of the streets are named after New Zealanders. And that evening, this is before the official opening, there was the sponsors' dinner at one of the hotels a few miles out of Le Quesnoy, the main city of Valenciennes. The room that we had it in was absolutely glorious. It's the kind of thing we don't get in New Zealand. It was just amazing. And there's a little photo of our entree, and of course with a little bit of French wine. Then the next day we had the official public opening with speeches, and that's Sir Jerry there at the pulpit doing one of the speeches, and it's the Le Quesnoy Mayor to his right, Sir Don. Behind the Pussy Willow is Celia Coe, who did a most amazing job at emceeing the opening. She would do her speech in English, she would then do her speech in Māori, and then she would do it in fluent French. She'd been the former Trade Commissioner to Vietnam and Consul General to Ho Chi Minh City, so her French was absolutely excellent. So Celia is one of the strategic advisors to the Trust and has done a lot of work for the museum. And this is some of the folk who attended. There was about 150 to 200 present. In the left, there's Buck Shelfridge, who most of you would know, who's the chairman of the RSA, and on the left is Duke Dobson's husband, Graham. And sorry, I've forgotten the name of the other chap. And here's some local gendarmes who were okay with me taking their photo. We had very good security, so they were looking after us. And then on the right, here's Celia Coe, who I've just talked about, and the Mayor of Le Quesnoy. Then we had a soiree that evening, and on the left is the soiree venue. And on the right, there's two more expats. There were so many New Zealand expats who have been away and stayed away from New Zealand. And on the right is Dame Judith Mayhew Jonas, who has had various postings over the years and is currently the chair of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and she had her travel partner Mary with her as well. There's myself on the right. This is the day after the official opening, where it was much more relaxed and we all had another look through the museum. And in the centre, I'm just giving you a taster here because, you know, it'd be great if many of us could go there and have a look, but that's the ladder in the middle of the museum, climbing up high. So I won't tell you too much about it, or else I'll spoil it if you ever go. So that's the opening of the museum, and a day later I got one of those little cassettes on the left that you may know, and I got COVID, and apparently quite a few others from there did, which was a bit unfortunate, but better at the end of the holiday than at the beginning. And there I am with my feet up. I got a wheelchair at Heathrow Airport to get onto the aeroplane, so that was very nice. And here we go. This is the soldier on the left. He is in the museum, and he is one of those ultra-sized chaps. Quite an amazing thing. So there we go. I have finished, and just wondering if there's any questions, please.
Yes, so if you finish sharing your screen, then a few people can put their things up. Sally, you've got your hand up, so
Stop sharing.
Oh yeah, I was meant to be clapping, but I did. I did want to say something. So when I was about 10 years old, I went to a guide camp at Foxleys, which is about, I was just looking at the map, and it's 3.5 miles from Brockenhurst. And when I stayed at Foxleys, I remember it, you know, Brockenhurst being mentioned, and we went to a small church there. And
that's right.
Yeah, and one of the things we had to do is we had to remove our knives, you know, because every girl guide had a knife in her belt, and also males had to remove their hats in case they had knives underneath it. So that was really interesting. I was trying to think, was Foxleys, the guide place, so it's huge, it's 35 acres, involved with the care of the soldiers? But I don't think it was. But when I was working in Wellington at National Archives, they did have a painting of Brockenhurst, the one you've just described, and with, you know, where the soldiers stayed. So I don't know whether any of you have seen that or whether it's still on display. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's a really good book on Brockenhurst by Claire, can't remember, but there is a you know, really good book all about Brockenhurst. Lovely photos and great details. So your wee village might be mentioned in there too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, have we got any other questions for Christine or comments? Or...
Oh, wonderful. Dumbfounded.
No, it means you've done a great presentation, Christine, because there's nothing left to ask.
I actually think I would like to say I think it was an amazing presentation. There was so much information, and probably what we're all doing is processing. There was just so much in there. We're all taking time to think through so many of the things that you were talking about, and I really loved that you took that view of how you set up the project, how you're making it accessible to people, and the decisions that you made along the way about how you were going to do things, which I found really interesting. And then the project itself, obviously, and finally going to the Quesnoy, which is incredible. What a way to end it. So I personally just have sat here thinking, wow, there's a lot to process. I know I'll be going back and watching the recording.
Yeah. It's certainly one of those bucket list venues, you know. It's should be on every person's, you know, OE. Not that we call it OE at our age, but, you know, I think it's a great place for those, rather than going all the way to Gallipoli, which is a lot further, they can just pop in at France now. So yeah,
I think it widens our view. Everything that widens our view is good, and particularly of World War One. Interestingly, I was talking with a friend who is involved in the New Histories curriculum, and they're actually starting to teach Cambridge as well, and she was trying to look at how to cross-contaminate, you know. And I'm thinking, listening here, this is a great way to cross-contaminate. It's World War One, and it's also New Zealand, which is
yeah.
Great.
Yes, and Hannah's put in the comments, it's a great talk and what a lot of work you did. And I agree with her that I would love to visit the museum and, you know, see what they've done there, because I'm sure it'll be quite special. And I know my grandfather's in the list because I had a sneak peek, but there are other family members that, well, you know, you sent me a copy, Christine. What else was going to happen?
Bound to happen.
But, you know, there's probably other members of the family that was seeing service at that time that, you know, maybe on the list as well. So it'll be interesting to see. And I think I know my branch at Kilburney's doing a trip out to Trentham in the new year, at some point next year. And so I'm going to be taking my grandfather's thing there, so they can tell me what it says. I think Yvonne, you're the one who is. Well, I'm muting you. Sorry, you're the one who's making me echo. Sorry.
Now I mentioned my cousin Barry Sylvester, who was the manager of the data. He massaged it, and I organised and did. It's unbelievable how much there is to do in a project. I'm sure those who've done them find out, managing 10 people and data and who should be doing what. And when the project was going through, my cousin found he didn't know who his grandfather was because his dad was adopted. By that time, at the end of the project, he'd found out who his grandfather was, and he was at Le Quesnoy. And my cousin had always had this burning interest in Le Quesnoy. He went to the 100th celebrations and just felt something about it. And isn't it just so amazing that his grandfather was on our list? So
it's a lovely find.
It is a lovely find. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the things going forward that the board is going to have some discussions about how, but there was a little part 2 of the project slipped in by Carol, which talked about writing biographies of these people. And one of the big new aspects of the Kiwi Collection is that we're going to be able to attach files to it, so PDFs and image files. So we're going to look into the whole logistics of running a project starting next year when I've recovered from my cold, and to and how we can get that up and running and ask people to contribute a biography, no matter how small, just to give a bit more information on all these men.
Can I just mention one more thing? Yep. When we were looking at the graveyard in Le Quesnoy itself, there was a little picture and like a Kiwi passport and a photo of the chap who died, and some information. They're just little cards laminated at the bottom of the graves done by the Arawhata College.
Wow.
And I've got a photo of them, and I thought, no, my presentation is going to be far too long if I include those as well. But they are just beautiful. Yeah. It's just got probably 25 words about them, a picture, and it's got Kiwi passport on it. And I was just blown away when I went there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great project for a school to undertake.
Yes.
Right, Yvonne, you've got your hand up and you're waiting so patiently. And you will need to unmute yourself because I can't do it, sorry.
Right. I was just going to say that it was actually my great uncle, but he was like a granddad to me because my granddad had died early, but it doesn't matter, Christine. But I have written probably 10 pages about him, and I used his war records, which were very hard to decipher. And there's so much coding that went on in the war years that I actually had 2 lists of abbreviations and things like that to actually find out exactly what it was. And I was able to find where he went to Brockenhurst and back again and backwards and forwards. And it was a great effort. But I've sent my biography off to the group, and it wasn't just about, it was about his whole life really, and I haven't heard back about them. And I did get a contact from the Weta workshop, and I said, well, I don't think there was a lot in it that would have helped them, but I was able to send them a photo of my uncle in his right uniform, and a little bit about him. So but I think the longer you leave it, the harder it's going to be, because I mean, at my age, it's in effect my grandfather at that level. And I think the younger people are not quite so involved, or won't have, or things will be thrown out when people die because the next generation are not particularly wanting it. I'm serious, you know, there's more and more people downsizing, and so I think the idea, if you're going to get them the biographies, to get on with it. Yeah, I mean, even if it's just a template for people to fill in the basics about them, would be better than, you know, a lot of biographies. So that's my little bit to say.
I think too that we can't undervalue how important it is actually bringing these stories to life, you know, because I did a biography of my great uncle Selwyn, who was actually in World War II, so sorry, not related to Le Quesnoy, but died very young. He would have only been 25. And so I had to do a lot of searching and a lot of finding to find information about him, to build a person, not just a soldier, but a boy who had hopes and dreams and did things. And I sent it to my uncle, who is 80, and he rang me the next day, and he was crying actually, and he just said, this is so wonderful. This is now he's become a person to me. He'd never met him because he was born just after World War II. And this is what I love about what we do in conjunction with projects like yours, Christine. As genealogists, we can really bring those names to life, and people can understand not just the war life of these men and women, but actually the whole life story, which is, you know, incredibly moving. So
Hi.
Hi,
I
Melanie.
just popped in to say something. I think that if we're going to do these biographies for Christine's project and thing, I think we should extend it to all other members of the war, like you're talking about, Megan. Your you know, your ancestors.
How amazing would that be?
Different ancestors, and really approach people, members, you know, to write their pieces. I think it would be incredible to record all of their stories.
And while there's still some kind of living memory.
Yeah. Sorry, I just jumped in to say that.
Well, you're muted at the moment, and I'd love to hear what you were going to say.
I think more and more we're realising that the people that came back from the war were equally as heroes as those who died in the war. And I know we had a friend who at one stage was director at the Nelson Museum, and he did quite a big project on that, about recognising the people who'd come back and the lives that they led, because they were very different from going away. Most of them had never left New Zealand, and but the case of my great uncle, he'd come out from Scotland and went back 4 years later to the war. So, you know, there's a lot of different experiences that they've had, and I think, yes, it does bring them to life, if you can write a bit of story about them.
Yeah, because this is a really good article. It's an old listener, but this was by Chris Pugsley. Again, he talks about those chaps and what they suffered, and you know, that's why I did the project, because you know, it's remembering these chaps who actually kept on suffering. You know, I mean, I know the suffering ended with the poor guys that died, and that's absolutely tragic, but it's as tragic coming home and just not being able to cope for probably often the rest of their lives, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not a good story.
No. Sally, you've got your hand up. Did you have something else you wanted to say?
I had somebody write to me, and their relative had a letter from, you know, Christine, you mentioned a Miss Dryden that visited all those patients. I've never heard of that list before, so thank you for that.
The secret list.
Yes, that's amazing. Well, anyway, this chap wanted to write to a relative of the nurse that had written to his family to say what was happening to his relative that was a soldier that was dying and then died. And this nurse wrote to the families. She must have written hundreds of letters. But I just think when you said about this Miss Dryden that visited the troops, I just thought of that story. And that's another story. I don't know whether this Miss Dryden wrote letters to the families, but that would be another part to add to the biography.
Yeah.
Just share that.
Yeah, there's certainly lots of things hiding away out there for you to go and have a big dig into once you know where they are. So Christine's shown us quite a few places today, but of course they've all gone into the database, which is a great resource to help you find what you're looking for. Melanie?
I did say, Megan, before that in an email to Sarah that this could be a really great project for the writing group. You're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry, Megan. Megan, you're muted.
We'll invite you to a meeting to come and introduce the idea, Melanie.
Absolutely fine, but I think it'd be an amazing thing for the writing group, and may encourage other members to join the writing group, you know.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, if there's a specific project, I think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, our writing groups are alive and well, and I think we've done our soldiers, our grandparents, and our favourite things, and then we got out the genealogist and said, right, what's the topic 6 months ahead? Get writing. So we do that now and again, which is quite successful, and you see all these Hamilton people in the magazine. I think, oh,
we
okay.
do.
Have we stopped recording now, have we?
Not yet, but if you'd like me to wrap up, I can.
No, that's absolutely fine.
I was just going to say that is there some way that NZSG can say put a list of resources up on their website, because Christine has named quite a few, and certainly it's important, I think, to know where to look. And some of those were a bit obscure, but really useful resources. So, and just to get more records, it's amazing how some people don't know where to look for things sometimes.
They can listen to the recording as well. Go through the PowerPoint.
Yeah, well, also the next genealogist has got Christine's article in talking about the project, and she lists quite a few of the sources in there and where to find them. So that will be coming out very soon, won't it, Melanie?
Very soon. I'm just finishing off the editing for you right now, Sarah.
Oh, thank you. So, oops. Christine, you've muted yourself if you wanted to say something. Well, I am aware that it's now 8:15, so I will wrap things up by thanking Christine for her amazing presentation and for leading this amazing project, and of course the team that were with her getting it all done, and you know the sources they managed to find, which are all going to be very useful to our members going forward, in addition to the fact that we now have this database which will be on the Kiwi Collection very, very soon. So thank you, Christine.
You're welcome.
And this is our last monthly presentation for 2022. Oh, good. Sally found the clapping button.
2023, maybe.
And so we'll be back in January on the 25th. That's the last Thursday in January 2024. It's a bit weird to be saying 2024 because it does feel like it's still 2002. But then we'll sort of be doing a presentation looking back at all the things that happened in 2023 and some of the things that we've got lined up for 2024. And I believe some of our online DNA interest group people are itching to come along and plug the DNA group, because they're doing really well on that and talk about the resources they've put together. So that will be one of the highlights of that presentation. So thank you all for coming along. and have a great Christmas. And I will hope to see most of you next year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody.